community is definitely helpful to get a sense that we're all in this together. We're also going to ask that for the majority of the time together that people stay muted. This just helps with general background noise and all of that. We're all experts at this point in terms of Zoom. Most of us can probably do Zoom in our sleep. So we'll just ask that you continue to keep yourself muted. We are going to record the workshop. There were several people that weren't able to be here with us. So the majority of the time when we're speaking, it'll mostly be Sarah or I on the screen. But if you do want to change your name, you only list your first name or whatever makes you more comfortable, you should find that in the participant button, and you can click the little dots and change your name. We'll also be periodically putting a couple of links in the chat box. So if you look at the lower part of your screen, you can hit the chat box button and it should show up on the right side of your screen. And we'll let you know when we're intending to put things there on the side. If you'd like, you can also use the chat box to type up any questions that are coming up for you during the workshop. We're definitely pretty packed here in terms of content and material that Sarah and I want to focus on. So we may not have a ton of time at the end to answer questions, but just encourage you to put stuff in there. It's really helpful for Sarah and I to see what's coming up for people. And we'll also share contact information if people want to get in touch with us afterwards. We really love hearing from participants and hearing more about your experience. Some people on the call are receiving CEUs or credit for the workshop. So Sarah, do you want to say a thing or two about what people should expect there?
Yeah, if you have come to this workshop and hope to get CEUs, I'm going to put my email in the chat right now. And once the workshop is over, just shoot me an email, and then you can get your 1.5 NASW social work CEU certification for your time here today.
Great.
So just shoot me an email.
Okay. And we also wanted just to say that we will share the slides for this presentation afterwards. We'll send a follow-up email. So for those of you that really, like to take notes or want to write down a bunch of stuff, we will share the slides themselves afterwards with some other links. So Sarah, I think we'll just go into a little bit more content. You think we're good timing wise?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So before moving further, we just felt that it would be really valuable for all of us just to pause and turn towards the suffering that we are witnessing here in our own country and across the globe. This workshop is focused on tools to be present to our own pain and discomfort and grief, as well as others. And we've witnessed in this week alone so much tragedy and so much loss for those that are here in the United States with us and elsewhere. So in whatever way feels authentic to you, we just wanted to open up this space with about 30 seconds or so of silence and just ask if it's comfortable to people just to close your eyes and do whatever feels genuine to you, to hold space and an awareness of suffering that so many people are enduring at this point. So we'll just open the space with silence. Thank you. So this workshop is a collaborative endeavor between Sarah Peterson from Mourning, a really exceptional human being, and myself, Elizabeth Johnson, from the Peaceful Presence Project. And we just wanted to open up with some short presenter and intros just to give you a sense of who we are. I currently work as the executive director for the Peaceful Presence Project, and this is an organization that's based in Central Oregon, here in Bend. And as an organization, our mission is really to help people live well and age well and die well by reimagining the way that our communities talk about and plan for and experience the last stages of life. So there are 6 individuals involved in the organization. We all work as end-of-life doulas. And our work is really focused on providing non-medical and thoughtful support to individuals and families. And we do this in a variety of different ways by encouraging and facilitating holistic advanced care planning conversations. We focus pretty extensively on educational opportunities and trainings, really helping communities to look at what it means to be more grief and death literate, and by offering compassionate presence at the bedside for individuals and families during these last months and weeks and days of a life. So we're structured as a nonprofit. We feel that it's really important to make our services available to anyone who self-identifies a need for them. And lastly, I also work as a sorrow or a grief companion for people as a side practice. And from a personal side of things, about 10 years ago, my son died shortly after birth. And it really was that experience, amongst others, that's really informed a lot of my relationship and personal deep dive, looking at these territories of grief and discomfort and what it looks like to navigate these spaces. So I'm really grateful to be here with all of you today, and I will hand it over to Sarah for a self-introduction.
Hi, everyone. And first of all, Elizabeth is also a very extraordinary woman, and it's a real treat to work with her on these kinds of projects because of the experience and the mission and her life story that she brings to the table in a way that's vulnerable and with an incredible willingness to share what she's learned with others, including me. So very much grateful to share the space with her today as a presenter. I run a nonprofit called Mourning, and our mission is to shift the culture of grief after experiencing the loss of my daughter when my family was hit by a drunk driver, and 3 months later, the death of my father because of a grief-induced heart attack. I was very much awoken to the deficits in our culture for people who are in deep grief, any kind of grief or suffering, actually. And I had been a hospice social worker for many years and had heard families share the same sort of sentiment in their own grief. But until I, of course, was walking this dark path by myself or as myself, I hadn't quite seen it up front and close. And so we started Mourning as a way to begin a new way to talk about grief, a new way to share in grief, the collective grief experience, to open up conversations and give people as either supporters or receivers the tools to ask for and offer what is best. So thanks so much for being here, and I'm eager to get started on our presentation with you today. When we think in hospice care, especially the team where, the social worker lands uses this model. Whose pain is it? So when you think about being, and we'll call the supporters the people who are showing up to those who are suffering, and the receivers the ones who are grieving or suffering the loss of a dream, a job, that's kind of the nature of supporter and receiver. So as the supporter, if you show up to the receiver uncomfortable, not having dealt with your own issues, you're going to contribute to the total pain of the receiver. In this case, when we think about caregiver pain, the example, as Elizabeth and I tossed this idea back and forth yesterday, that came to mind for me to really illustrate the harm that can be done in not understanding what you're bringing to the table. Most people are very uncomfortable when I say, my nearly 3-year-old daughter was killed before my eyes when my car was hit by a drunk driver on a Sunday morning. That makes people uncomfortable. It is not easy information to hear or talk about. The ones who have done the work to know that they cannot fix my pain are the ones who remain present to it. The ones who want to run away as fast as they can from those words are the ones who can actually further deepen the suffering in that moment. About a week after our car crash, I had several broken ribs and had denied any sort of medical intervention, mostly because I didn't see the reason to live. And at this particular day, looking in the eyes of my son, who was with me in my home, and my husband, and saying, I need help. I'm in a lot of pain here. I called a friend and my mom, who came and collected me and brought me to urgent care to hopefully get some pain medicine. And they took me in the room, and I can only imagine what I looked like on that day. I can't, I mean, it wasn't pretty. And the nurse said, "Okay, Sarah, what's going on here?" And I said, "I was in a car crash. My daughter died." And her next words were, "Okay," as she typed. Okay. I lost it. I came unglued. I mean, no, none of this is okay. And the assault that that woman uh, did to me was so severe that it absolutely, when we look at this pyramid of whose pain is it, her unwillingness to be with my suffering by kind of trying to rush me through the intake absolutely complicated the suffering I was in that moment. I I think I threw up everywhere. I cried. I had to be moved to a special room where somebody who knew what they were doing could actually be with my pain, because I was more than broken ribs. I was a broken person. And so, if we really consider what that looks like to show up, let's just say to the bedside, whatever that bedside might be in your life, clear on what makes us uncomfortable and how close are we willing to get to it so that we can protect the receiver from our untended business. So that's kind of the total pain model, saying what the supporter is trying to do and is unwilling or unable to do absolutely affects the outcome for the receiver. So I challenge us all to consider, in a very light sense, what our go-to reaction might be. Are we a flight, a freeze, or a run, or a fight version when an uncomfortable situation pops up? So, thinking about these little scenarios to sort of get your mind down the path of how do I handle uncomfortable situations. I'm curious, you're sitting with a group of people who you are familiar with. They start to share information. You have an opinion starting to form. And, these days, this is likely happening more and more with all the things happening in the world. The person next to me turns and says, "What do you think about the topic?" I wonder if you would immediately feel nervous, if you would be jumping out of your seat ready to engage because you couldn't possibly hold it in for one more second, or if you would probably just sort of skip ahead. If you had a pass button, you'd press it. Same sort of contemplation around if you were interviewed, those who know you best might expect you to share your views, just generally agree with them, or again, stay quiet, pass button. And the third example to contemplate is, it's a Sunday afternoon, something's come up, you need to ask for help because there's no way you can pull this whole thing together alone. You're tempted to start calling around to see who's available. And I wonder, when you're in a position of asking for help, do you feel like it's no problem? Do you feel like it's a huge problem? Like you are the problem for needing help? Or will you do anything you can in including staying up all night, to avoid asking for any kind of help? Because that's just the worst thing you can imagine doing, is asking for help.
So with this, we just want to give everybody an opportunity to speak some of this stuff out loud. We're only going to do one breakout conversation. And we found that, it's one thing to sit there and sort of ponder this yourself. It's a different thing to be witnessed in some of this reflection. So we're going to, the Zoom magic is going to have people break out into smaller conversations. And the two things that we want you to really sort of tune into with yourself is this question of, when you consider, maybe where your responses to the previous three inquiries landed, in what ways does your style maybe serve when extending support or receiving support for your grief process? And in what ways might your style hinder you from extending the support or receiving support for your grief process? And again, let yourself be surprised by this. A lot of times when we, think, oh, I just know this is how I am or what I think about things or how I show up. Oftentimes it's a little bit different. We start speaking this out loud to others. So Sarah is working on the breakout process right now. We're going to have 10 minutes total for this conversation. So let me ask, Sarah, how many people per group do we feel like we're going to have?
4 and
4 people per, okay. So once you get with your groups, everyone will have around 2 minutes to speak into the conversation, your response to these questions, and in what way does your style serve when extending support or receiving support, and how does your style hinder you from giving or receiving support? And you'll see there'll be a timing thing that'll come up on the screen that'll say, you've got 8 minutes left, you've got 6 minutes left, you're halfway through, which will just help you all collectively to kind of keep an eye on where you are in the conversation. And just making sure that everybody has a chance to speak into the circle.
Here we go.
Anything else there? Great.
Yeah, good to go.
Okay, we'll see you all in 10 minutes. I didn't go.
I couldn't figure out how to not get you in there.
Okay. Did you stop recording? Let's see. I think we've still got some people coming in. People are using their full 58 seconds to finish up these conversations. Okay, here comes the rest of everyone. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Sorry, I think we've got the whole community. It looks like it. Okay. It's funny when we can't see everyone at once, you kind of have to scroll through to see who's here with us. And I see some people are not on mute. So just to avoid background noise, if you do see yourself not on mute, maybe you can just do that right now before we jump into this next section. Okay, so you might just consider bookmarking any hopefully potential insights or points of awareness that might have started to emerge from these prompts and this small group sharing. We hope that just being in community with some other people was nice to start off the space as well. So we're going to transition here a bit and move into this next section where we want to provide a bit of a expansive vantage point from where we can start to understand another one of our main focal points for today, which is this question of how did we get here? Why is it that we are so unpracticed and pretty unskilled when it comes to standing close to uncomfortable topics, right? Or engaging in uncomfortable conversations. There's a psychologist from the Harvard, oops, sorry, I'm getting people coming in here. Harvard Medical School named Susan David. And in her work, one of the things she points out is that the core of our cultural dialogue is radically avoidant. And as we start to pay attention to the language that we all collectively use around difficult things like loss, grief, suffering, etc., we start to see that this avoidance really does permeate into so many areas of our life, whether it's how we maybe approach uncomfortable conversations that might be a bit more personal in scope, or whether we're considering our general style of oops, I just got muted there. This plays out in so many ways for us as a culture. So we just wanted to spend a little bit of time really exploring the impact of this avoidant stance. And what we share here is by no means exhaustive, right? There's so much to say about this, but hopefully it just provides more of a foundation from which we can kind of start moving forward in this conversation together. So I'd say one of the really fascinating things to note is that as a culture, embedded in the language that we all use is this really inherent distancing or defense against anything that's not comfortable, anything that feels a little bit demanding of us. And there's a lot of, really fascinating examples around this. One example, when we look at the language that we use surrounding places of discomfort or pain, we can often hear ourselves or other people saying things like, I just need to learn how to cope with this really difficult situation. As soon as they learn how to cope, they'll be okay. And interestingly, when we look at the word cope, it's a derivative of the word coup, which means to strike. So once we start really digging in there, what we begin to witness is that, they're built into the very language that we use on a day-to-day basis. There's oftentimes, this understanding that we need to go to battle with grief or death or uncomfortable things. And, if we pause and really feel into what this is like in the body, we're already in this place of great need and oftentimes fatigue. And then on top of this, there's a stance of, needing to be kind of defiant or triumphing over something that's uncomfortable. And we all know that language is power. It creates realities for us. So when we stop and really look at the ways that we consciously or unconsciously speak about discomfort, how we talk about pain, we see that so much of our language really supports this desire to stay distanced from the uncomfortable. Our culture also, as we all know, really sees pain and suffering and grief as being really heavy and messy, especially, things that have to do with death or loss, things that we can't control. And these things are often regarded as a stuff that needs to be fixed, or things that need to be altered, or things that need to be cleaned up. And we are so naturally rooted in something that's oftentimes referred to as this mastery orientation to the world, that we really perceive ourselves as people who have to and should solve problems. Most everything that we confront, typically has an answer or a way for it to be changed. And so one of the byproducts of this is that we start to see everything in life as this problem that can use our solving. I also love the work of someone named Resmaa Menakem. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him. He's a trauma specialist, and with a focus on racialized trauma as it's experienced in the body. And he talks about the concept of premature consolation, where, in this, we strive to make everything just totally fine, okay, before we've actually done the work or have asked others to do the work to really grapple with difficult situations. And as we start to follow that thread, I think we can see how this approach or mindset plays out in so many territories in our life. We don't really want to do the tough stuff most of the time. And culturally, we have this pressure of doing things perfectly and cleanly as possible. And this really has an impact on our collective psyche. We also have this real cultural focus or preference for this sensation of ascending versus descending. And I often quote the works of somebody named Francis Weller, who's a really well-respected psychotherapist and author. And he's always talking about the fact that, we're really fearful of the downward movement. We like this feeling of being closer to the light, of happiness, of levity, and our individual and our collective value oftentimes sources from this capacity to stay productive, to stay up, to push through. And so a lot of times what happens is people who are suffering or grieving are met with everything that they don't need, right? Impatience, intolerance, frustration, because they are not necessarily embodying the things that we are all kind of collectively told to value. And there's this collective fear that, going towards the uncomfortable is really not the same thing to do. That in the end, the idea is this will make us more powerless, more unwell, more incapable. There's a book called It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine. And in it, she highlights that as a culture, we have a very difficult time reconciling the fact that there is suffering in life that never ever gets redeemed, that never is really overcome. That there are some things in life that we really just need to learn how to live with and lean into. And it's problematic for us because the myth we've been sold is that, everything really does need to work out. We have the power to make it work out. And if it doesn't, something's really wrong with the situation. So, because suffering and difficulty are oftentimes not perceived as being normal aspects or normal experiences of life, we oftentimes find ourselves trapped in this territory of denial and distortion. And people who are sitting with discomfort, those who are grieving or in pain, often feel really misunderstood, really apart from, and most oftentimes ask to be anywhere else other than where they find themselves. And whereas grief and suffering are really meant to be shared and acknowledged, right? To the core, we are very much connectors. The majority of people are asked to be in these spaces in very solitary manners. And so in this really confusing way, we've privatized the experience of discomfort and grief. And I have this quote here on the screen from an organization called Citizen Well, and it says, "We are supposed to need help." I saw this on a post a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, the fact that we need this reminder is such an indicator of where we are. So in our discomfort, either intentionally or out of this complete lack of awareness or practice, we can tend to make people be in their pain in a very alone and solitary way. We can dismiss or undermine others' experiences because of our own complete discomfort with discomfort. We do all we can to bypass our own suffering because we don't have the tools or the practice to really know how to be there for ourselves. We put this really confusing pressure on ourselves to make things better, to say the right thing, to have the magic fix that nobody else has except for us. And I think most tragically, we oftentimes really fail to listen to others' stories because we have this hyper focus on them being better. And so what this really reveals to us is that we are usually anything but present. And without intentional practice, most of us really aren't capable of really sitting with the what is. And there's this massive need to cultivate tools and practices that really allow us to show up to this very grief illiterate and pain avoidant world that we find ourselves in. There's a woman named Joanna Macy who I love. She's an activist and an author, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of her. And she says unacknowledged pain and grief result in disconnection, in burnout, and in a really damaging lack of empathy for other people. And this, we look around the world right now and we see this is such a real issue for us. So a huge first step is really recognizing the difference between solving pain and being with pain. Being able to be with pain helps us in our humanness, right? It creates more connection and much more resilient communities. So one of our intentions here today for Sarah and I is to really share some tools around how to start cultivating this capacity to show up and be present to what is. So we want to just do another real quick self check-in exercise. We're not going to do breakout rooms around this. This is just another sort of, kind of self-awareness activity. And this is around something we're referring to as anticipatory discomfort. And, we think this is really important to explore just because there's so much that we can do to pay attention to and build out our distress tolerance when it comes to showing up for difficult experiences and difficult conversations with people. So I'll just ask you to pause, maybe, pull back a bit and get settled into your body, into yourself, and just start thinking through a time in your life when something uncomfortable was happening, or maybe you were anticipating discomfort. And maybe something was happening, like a relationship was ending, or something really meaningful to you was drastically shifting. Maybe someone near to you was coming close to death. And just think through the experience, an experience where there was a real emotional intensity to it. And as you spend some time just rooting in your body, as we did with the earlier exercise, start to reflect on that question of what did you do? What did you feel? What happened for you? And in your mind's eye and your body, begin to feel into, maybe there was some sort of instinct to fight. Maybe a lot of anger emerged in this feeling of it shouldn't be this way. I do not like this. Or maybe there was this instinct to flee, right? This massive sense of overwhelm, of needing to get away, to turn away from what is. Or maybe you were paralyzed by this awareness of this major change, and maybe you sort of froze or numbed out. Or maybe you were able to face that which was before you, and you found a little bit more, a place of steadiness or presence. And we just are, calling this up because as we begin to cultivate this level of self-awareness, we start to see trends for ourselves in terms of how, we respond to or react to uncomfortable spaces. There is a trend here if we watch. I know for me, I really have a tendency to want to flee, to attempt to turn and outrun that which really feels like is out of my control. So, you can just continue to spend some time thinking through this with yourself. The point being here is that because we generally avoid the intensity of discomfort, right? These windows where we're experiencing this can be sources of great pain for us because due to this avoidance orientation that we find ourselves in, there's oftentimes a lot that's left unsaid or untouched, right? And typically in these spaces without practice, we can deal with things like forgiveness issues, a lot of unfinished business, regrets. Maybe we find ourselves not having been kind of consistent with candid conversations. That there was a lot left unsaid when it comes to expressing our true feelings in these important spaces. And ideally, we're finding these skills over a lifetime, but for a lot of us, that's not necessarily the case. It takes practice to be with ourselves, to be with others, and to really show up in our vulnerability. So one exercise or tool that we just wanted to share that I really like, because I think it grounds us and helps us to get present and to aid in sort of this essential truth telling, is this ancient Hawaiian practice of ho'oponopono, which loosely translated means to make right. And for those of you that are familiar with Ira Byock, he's a well-known palliative care physician and author. He also references this process in his book, The Four Things That Matter Most. So in this particular context, looking at difficult conversations, discomfort, grief, suffering, I think this tool is really great because it offers up this practical means of sort of walking this full circle back into the center of our lives and looking at what really matters most to us, right? It's not a magical fix. It's not going to fix most everything, but it is this tool or framework that can serve to really reestablish this truth and presence and connection. So really briefly, a way to use it is to be able to pull up an image of someone you really care about in your life. And this practice can be done for multiple people. So you imagine them sitting, before you or next to you, whatever feels right to you, and placing more emphasis sort of on the heart center. You begin to reflect on the four things listed here on the screen. And the four things that you're striving to really communicate clearly are: dear so-and-so, I am sorry for, please forgive me for, or I forgive you for, thank you for, and I love you because. And you can do it just like a meditation, right? Only with yourself, as if you're having a conversation with this person, but it really is much more personal. Or it can be really useful to write out your responses and eventually gift people these words from the heart. And again, I think it's a really simple exercise, but also really powerful. And I think it's powerful because it offers up this opportunity to walk towards the uncomfortable, right? To be revealing and to touch upon these essentials, to recognize where we have caused hurt, where we want to extend or ask for forgiveness, and where we're really moved to express gratitude and love. It opens up the space for vulnerability and care. And fundamentally, it is about presence, right? Being present to what is, all of it, to the easy to love aspects, and also to the discomfort and the pain. So we don't have time to really go into that personally in this space, but I would encourage everybody just to play with this exercise at some point in the near future. And we'll share the slides, and you'll have these questions afterwards. So I'm going to pause there and turn it back to Sarah now, and she's going to share some more insights and wisdom around what it looks like to show up for the grieving process, or these spaces of discomfort for someone.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And just going back to the four things that matter most, they are what I like to call pocket statements for when sometimes it feels like there's nothing to say. And oftentimes it's best to say nothing, but in the event where words are sort of required, those are such great pocket statements, because no matter what, when you're a supporter to a receiver, to say, I love you because you got up today, because you reached out to me, because you kept breathing, fill in the blank. It's a very disarming way of showing support that is filled with love and authenticity. So pocket statements there, and we'll kind of circle back to pocket statements here in just a few. So in the world of, grief and counseling and spirituality, people toss around showing up or creating space. And I often wonder if most of the world understands exactly what it means to show up, to create space, because I know there's certain people in my life where I'd say show up and they'd be there with casserole. What do you need me to do? Clean the bathroom? Not quite using it in the way we're meaning it, which is to be present, to be willing to sit in the discomfort with me, with someone. So when you are faced with this uncomfortable situation, this person who's suffering for whatever reason, what would it mean for you to avoid the should? I call it the should slip. You should eat something. You should get up. You should take a shower. You should rest. You should feel better today. You should, could we go on and on till the end of time with the shoulds? Likely. And I bet if I could poll the room and we said, how many of you took those shoulds and followed through, and boy, did it ever work, I don't think we'd get much response, because they are not the experts on our lives. We are the experts on our lives. And when you're telling somebody they should do something, you're assuming this almost authority over what's best for them. Not fair. And we all know that we don't like it, so instead of saying what you think they should be doing, you could maybe say, I wonder if you'd feel better if you took a shower. I wish you would eat something. It's disarming to say those more authentic things that you do mean with all your heart. I wish you would eat something. Well, I'm not hungry. Okay. But when you throw the should in there, it's like at the end of the day, somebody was right and somebody was wrong. I either met the expectation or I disappointed. So really encouraging in any situation where you're dealing with a suffering person to skip the should altogether, use wonder, use wish. They're very soft, gentle words. Validation instead of fixing. I have a teacher who always says the only way to fix grief is to bring back the person who died. Well, that can't be done. So how do we stop trying to fix it? Like Elizabeth said, this mentality we have that there's a problem and therefore a solution. There is no solution to grief in particular, or to even I've lost my job. That job is gone. And unless I can get that job back, we can't fix it. Now we can learn to live with it by finding a new job. We can learn to live with grief by continuing to find meaning in our lives. But the acknowledgement of the spoken word, I'm so sad. I don't know if I can keep going. How is that validated? That's validated with, tell me more. I'm listening. I believe you. I believe you. The people who could say to me, I believe you, Sarah, that this feels impossible to live through. Stop. Like you're reading a telegram. Stop. Wow. Really validating. I believe that they are with me in that space. I believe they are holding space. They are showing up. I believe you. I believe you that this is overwhelming and so difficult you can't imagine another day. I believe you that you're not sleeping at night. I'm not going to say you should start taking Ambien, you should get more exercise. No, I believe you that it's terrible to not get rest. I'm here for you. Tell me more. So hopefully you can see how those are, like I said, more disarming to the receiver coming from the supporter. And the competitive grief, this is something that shows up a lot in my life because in my community, where I'm very close to many people in my community, what I've gone through has been public. There was a trial, there was newspaper articles, people know me. And I see people on the street. For example, we entered the airport before COVID, and I was traveling with my friend, and a mutual friend saw her. She said, "Oh, hi!" And then she saw me. She goes, "Oh, Sarah." And it was like totally different treatment of two people with love and all the right intentions, But because she, in her mind, and I know her story, had decided that the way her grief unfolded was nowhere near what I had been through. Therefore, she was just this little tiny peon of a supporter. And I'd wished so badly for her to not feel that way, because the bottom line is her grief was the worst because it was hers and it happened to her. Mine is the worst because it happened to me. And this person's is the worst because it happened to them. And there's really not much value in hearing for the receiver, but mine is nothing compared to yours. I never quite understand where that's supposed to go. You're right. Your grief doesn't matter. Mine is the worst. So only mine matters. I mean, that's kind of the only outcome I can come up with that makes sense to that statement. And that is just so not who I am as a person to respond with those kinds of things. But to really think about, yeah, perspective is everything. And there's value in knowing that I could have lost both my children that day. There is value in knowing that my situation for me is the worst, but I don't appreciate, as in a supporting role, somebody trying to diminish their own grief to protect the severity of mine, if that makes sense. I would have people in the more downside of competitive grief, where maybe they're trying to wave the flag that they too lost my daughter in their life, say, well, I lost her too. And what I wish they would say is, I miss her so much too. Because those two things sound so different when you're sitting on your front steps, kind of unable to move your body. I lost her too. I miss her so much too. I think probably this group can see how those two different statements sound like, I'm willing to be with you. I'm right there with you. And we are very separate still. Next slide, Elizabeth. So the open presence, again, going back to what does it mean to hold space? What does it mean to show up? When you go to be with somebody who is suffering, fill in the blank about the suffering, because there's plenty of it to go around these days. I think it's crucial that you don't have an agenda, which really starts with, abandoning this idea that they should do anything that you think is best. That you are there, you're fully present, that you're conscious of whether or not you're checking your phone, you're conscious of whether or not you're interrupting, you're conscious of the listening style you're using, you're conscious of all the things that matter when you want to be heard. How can we tell if somebody's listening? We know. Show up with that way, right? Show up committed to the experience, because when you go into a supporter receiver relationships, there's a lot of unspoken agreements that I think we avoid and kind of screw up sometimes, but that's kind of what we're trying to clear up here, is what is that unspoken agreement? Definitely out of the fix it mentality, because you can't fix it. You just can't. A beginner's mind, which the beginner's mind really means teach me. That's where the tell me more comes in. I need to learn. I am not the expert on your life, Elizabeth. You are. Tell me. I'm here. And you cannot be attached to the outcomes. In social work school, I think that they beat that drum all day, every day. And still 10 years later, I am learning that even in my own practice of how the other person's storyline cannot be a measurement of my own storyline. I'm not in charge of that. And so unattached to outcomes. Maybe the receiver didn't take a shower before you left. Maybe your whole goal was to get that person fed and showered, and boy, didn't happen. Can't turn into a measurement of you. And then the compassionately listening, which we will talk a lot more about, because I think that the compassionate listening piece is one of the most important parts of showing up, of holding space. One of my favorite quotes is, "To listen another's soul into a state of disclosure is quite possibly the greatest gift." Douglas Steers said that, and I saw that first probably 15 years ago, and I don't remember things like that well, but that one has stuck with me because it's so true. What does it mean to listen someone into a state of disclosure? Elizabeth's going to tell us here in just a minute. And to just sort of wrap up this, what does it mean to be present? Why is it important how I show up? Why is it important if I'm clear about what I'm walking into? Think about the total pain. What am I bringing to the bedside, so to speak? Am I bringing a busy day? Am I bringing a bunch of stuff? Am I bringing a hungry belly? You just got to know what makes up the puzzle. And so I love this quote, and I use it whenever I can. The way in which care is given can touch the most hidden places. That means, I mean, when we think about the nurse at the beginning of this workshop that said, okay to me, imagine if she would have looked up and said, oh my God, I am so sorry to hear that. We are here to help you. The outcome of that particular day would have been transformed for me. It would have changed everything. And so that's what Cicely Saunders is saying. The way in which we are delivering this care can touch the most hidden places. It's the way we're doing it. It's not giving the pain pills. It's actually acknowledging my full pain, my whole pain that day. So I hope that makes sense. Elizabeth is going to teach us more about how important listening is.
Thanks, Sarah. So let's talk a little bit about how we don't listen. And I think it's really important to start here because these are the things that occur a lot of the time, right? And when we need support and we try to sit down with someone to share what's going on for us, we are oftentimes met with this absurdity of different elements that are in the end really not helpful, And I think going back to the overview that I provided earlier regarding our culture's relationship with difficulty, with grief, with suffering, so much of what is unhelpful, unfortunately, sources a lot of time from this avoidant and an unskilled relationship with difficult things, with uncomfortable conversations, with this lack of willingness to turn towards that which we really don't want to see. So how do we don't listen? Well, the first thing is we don't listen with the intention to respond, right? And we've all been there. We're in this place of immense need. We are low energy. It's taking so much just to get there to try to speak about our experience. And as we are doing so, we can see that the listener in front of us is really just waiting for you to pause, right? So that they'll get some little opener where they can insert their story, their feel-good response, their whatever it is they've been really formulating in their mind for some time, right? And you've lost them 5 minutes ago. They are not feeling you, and you are there in this greatest form of vulnerability, right? And that this recognition, oh, and they are here thinking about what they want to fill the space in. People do not get their needs met in these dynamics. And at the core, even if what someone is thinking about saying, that there's a good intention there, it's really at its core a very selfish way to show up. So I'd say that's one of the things we want to watch as we're arriving in these spaces for someone. True disclosure is not going to happen when we're in this, oh, I know what I'm going to say next, and this is really going to change everything for this person. We don't deny or invalidate a person's experience, right? And trying to be helpful, we can often say things like, that's silly, you really shouldn't feel that way. You don't have to feel that way. Or, you know what? I just don't think it's as bad as you think. And let's just spend some time, focusing on all the good things. What is happening here? We are trying to hold off the immediacy of their pain. And we are saying to them, my priority is my comfort. I don't want to turn towards the thing that you want me to turn towards when you're going to share this with me. The thing that is taking you to your knees is too much. You are too much, right? And so this form of denial and invalidation is really painful for people, even if it's done with this good intention. We don't listen by interrupting. These are two very different things. We are very much from an interrupting culture. If you really make sort of a personal vow to pay attention to how much people interrupt one another, I mean, it's painful to watch after a while. And unfortunately, the reality is that this interruption, this way of talking over one another, does not stop in these spaces of great need. And what is happening here, right? To interrupt is to say, what I want to say right now trumps everything else, including your pain and your experience. And so feel into the message of that for somebody that is arriving in a space with great need. We don't listen by going into our life story, chapter 43, right? We all love giving great advice. I've gone through this. I know how you feel. I've seen someone else go through this, and this is what I learned. After my son died, I can't tell you the number of times that, somebody in the greatest intentions would come towards me and say, I just want to say that I'm here and I want to know how you're doing. And within a matter of minutes, somebody was sharing, oh, I know in my life, when I lost my grandmother, when my cousin's, aunt's niece died, this is what happened in the family. And in the end, none of it meant anything to me, right? It didn't mean anything to the moment in the moment. It wasn't coming in and making anything about my situation any less painful, any better. So, that's another thing to really watch. What is useful to say in these spaces? There's an acronym of WAIT. Why am I talking? And I think oftentimes in that sharing the life story piece or sharing the details, I oftentimes kind of have that thing come up. Why am I talking right now? Is this necessary? In our quest to understand what is going on for someone, we oftentimes ask these unending questions, right? Well, what went on? Well, what did it look like? Well, what happened after that? Well, what did he say? Well, oh my gosh, what did you do then? And this is a really tricky one because I think we often ask questions to show that we care, right? But in doing this, what happens is that we're really directing the conversation. Our questioning is signaling, okay, now we'll talk about this. And now let's focus on this. And if we pause and really consider what is feeding our curiosity, right? Most often we'll find it's about us. It's about sort of that the scratch that you can't itch, that you just really you're trying to get this information, or it's about a discomfort or moving the conversation around enough so that we don't have to pause too long and actually feel what's going on for another. And then finally, we don't listen with his intention to fix or solve a problem. We've touched upon this in multiple ways already, but we've all been here. People get so uncomfortable, especially with stories around pain and grief and suffering, that our move to make things better comes out a lot of times as this heartless or almost kind of it feels abusive sometimes. After my son died, and I would be on the phone with somebody from the insurance company, or going to a doctor's appointment, or on the phone with a good friend, and people would say, I know it's hard, but at least you can have another child. At least it was your child and not your partner who died. Again, this does not fix the situation. It did not take my grief away, right? I know it's hard, but they're in a better place. At least they lived a long life. There's a reason for everything. They're such an angel. God wanted them back. And we've all said these things to one another in one form or another, right? I've done it. I think back and I think, oh, I said that. And I now, having been through something so painful, I know how cutting that was. None of these comments fixed my pain. Nothing, they didn't change anything for me. And in a lot of ways, they actually alienated me and made it feel so that I felt totally unsafe speaking these things out loud. So I was recently reading an interview in the New York Times with a woman, Dr. Diane Meyer, she's the director of the Center to Advance Palliative Care at Mount Sinai in New York. And in the article or the interview, she was reflecting on the ways in which the pandemic has really traumatized millions of Americans, especially related to the grieving process. And she's a medical doctor. She's the recipient of a MacArthur Foundation Genius Fellowship. She works at a really, really high level. And in the interview, she said this: the only treatment for existential and spiritual pain is relationship, attention, sitting with, not trying to fix. That willingness to be with and engage the person in giving voice to that suffering is such a powerful intervention. It is not about we can fix everything, but we can enable giving voice to profound suffering, and that makes a huge difference. And after I read this, it so stood out for me, and I think sometimes we throw out these terms like presence, like compassionate listening, like holding space. And, I think there's this question of, does any of this actually even hold any weight? Doesn't that feel so passive? What are you actually doing there? And I think, to have a medical director equating this act of compassionate listening and presence as a very valid and powerful intervention for people is such a necessary reminder for all of us. So how are we in these spaces as the listener and the supporter? What are we really paying attention to? So the first thing, being present and centered and grounded. And I know these are things we throw around a lot as well. Be present, just ground yourself in the moment. And the reality is this really matters, right? You can't fake this. You either are there and you are present, or you are not. And this is something that the one who is in need will really feel this. Your presence, your full presence, is the thing that will enable someone to really give voice to their suffering. And what we can do for ourselves to really bring ourselves present and centered and grounded is, a whole other conversation, through meditation, through body awareness. And these are things that I trust a lot of you will, be able to do your own self-learning around. Demonstrate presence with body language and eye contact. This is another really, it feels obvious, but oftentimes, if you think back to the number of times where this hasn't happened for you, I'd say it's more often than not, right? So turn towards the speaker. If they are holding eye contact with you, do that back for them. We know that in terms of communicating with another, about 70 to 80% of the exchange is about the body language, how you are in the room, right? 15 to 20% is about the tone, the way in which you are relaying or expressing something to the person. And only 5 to 7% is really about the words, what you are saying. So when I think back to my places of greatest need, I don't remember at all what people said to me, right? I remember how they were next to me, how they were around me. I have on here, making the self-pact that the important part is not the content. We can get so wrapped up in what's being shared and the details. And we need to know that what is important is not what this person is necessarily saying, but the fact that a safe space is being created where someone can really be witnessed and received, and how often are we actually gifted this in our lives? It's not something that we frequently find. And then we work to contact the person's experience. And we do this not just by attuning to what they're saying to us, the words that are coming towards us, but also what emotions or sensations are present for them and for us. So what emotions, are evoked in me when I am listening to your story? What is my empathetic response, and how might I imagine this story is impacting you? And then what is going on, in my gut? What is going on in my body? Do I feel chills? Am I feeling my throat close up? Do I have this instinct to, want to run and get away? And these are all really important indicators of what is going on, and things to pay attention to when, fully receiving the other person. And these are not necessarily things that you're going to report back to the person. It's just a way to really, fully contact the immensity of the situation. And then how might we listen, right? So first thing is formulating this true intention to understand what the story, what the situation, what the suffering means to this person before us, not what it means to us, not what it means to another friend who, went through a similar difficult situation 3 years ago, but what it means to the person before us. And we know we are all a bunch of snowflakes, and meaning will manifest for each person in really different ways. And we help protect this space and this process for someone by not filling in all of the space, right? So this feels really obvious, or almost, again, too passive for people, but our ability to be present is massive. It really is earth-bending for people because it happens so infrequently. So to bring this compassionate presence to what is before us means that we are turning our full attention towards the person who is suffering. Our attention is all there. That we allow for silence, right? That you are not filling the space with your words. That you allow for stillness, that you're signaling you're not intending, you're not like halfway out the door. You're not turning away. And that you are allowing for this really ample space for reflection, right? And I always think about when they talk about the 50% rule in relationships, where, well, I feel like I'm meeting my partner 50%, and the reality is, it's closer to 20 or 30%. We're always overestimating how we're showing up in a space. The same thing here, right? That ample, the space for reflection is so essential, and we have to become comfortable with being able to be space tenders, and not overfilling, not starting to speak when the silence sets in, or when somebody goes into a deep space. The word emotion has its roots in the Latin word emovere, meaning to move through or to move out. So by being present to someone's suffering, to their emoting, to their mourning, to whatever's going on, we are actually doing something really profound. We are watching this process of the wisdom of the head and the heart and the body really moving through the intensity of this experience. And having that be witnessed is so essential. And then I have on here, convey accurate empathy. And what I mean by that is go beyond, just factual detail, and put yourself in their shoes without really taking on, taking on all of their emotional experience. They are going to have the experience over and over again of people wanting to talk about their loss in a really conceptual or heady way, right? Because this feels more safe to people. So instead of saying something like, I think I understand what you feel, which is this more cognitive way of trying to reflect back empathy, right? Saying something like, I really see and hear the depth of the experience for you. And it feels so difficult to put this in words. I am here. I am simply here. And giving priority to the emotional cadence of what someone is going through, really helps contact, again, the person's experience, and builds up this experience of, I am being seen in this. I am being witnessed. The important thing is somebody is feeling accompanied. I cannot make this better for you, but I am here for you. And then finally, as I have on here, be willing to enter into their hell. And this requires a lot of self-work, but it's about learning to be with without needing to tame or alter or displace someone's emotions and their experience. So I will pause there and hand it back over to Sarah.
Perfect job, Elizabeth. It's so hard when we're on these time crunches because so many things she says, I'm like, and right? What about this? What do you guys think? Don't you know? And so you really did it succinctly and very well. Thank you. One of, so Elizabeth's talked about where the problems show up, how as a supporter you might adjust your approach so that you are offering a more meaningful way to support somebody you care about. And then I think it's also important to turn the mirror back on ourselves as supporters one more time to really understand, what am I signing up for? Because if you don't know what you're signing up for, the chances that you or they might be disappointed are increase, right? So when you send a text, let's just use this example. You send a text to somebody who you know is suffering, how are you? If you're on your way home from work and you can't text back because you're driving, and then you get home and everybody's there waiting for you, that might not be the right time because when we've signed up for an exchange. So the griever says, I'm having a really hard time. Can you talk? Oh gosh, no, I really can't. I'm so that's kind of one example of knowing what you're signing up for. Sorry, I'm taking a sip of Diet Coke. I know it's really terrible to do. Always starting with, what is the goal? And is that goal reasonable and achievable? I want to know, I want this person to know I'm thinking about them. So I'm going to ask them, how are they doing? Is it achievable that we could have an exchange? Yes, because I've got time. No, I'm actually heading home to a whole storm of things to do. Okay, so readjust the goal. Perhaps your text would instead sound like, I was just thinking about you all day today. I hope we can connect soon. Be authentic, be true. Starting with, is the goal, what is the goal? Is it reasonable? Is it achievable? Then you say, whose need is it? Is it my need? I want to know they're okay. Is it their need? They really could use something. I know that they've been alone all day. So being clear on that, one over the other isn't right or wrong, but knowing where the need is coming from can help you prepare to know what you're signing up for. And what happens if you disappoint? I had a very close person in my life who did her very best to support and love me through the darkest of the days, write me a message. It was probably about a month after the trial ended, and she said, how are you? And I said, I think it's best you stop asking me that question, because historically in the year previous, I could tell that my answer was not what she wanted to hear. And it made it harder for her to keep going through the conversations with me. And my answer was not for a very long time going to be anything that she actually wanted to hear. So I said, I think it's best that you stop asking me that question. And that text exchange just digressed so quickly. Um, the supporter couldn't hear, was not willing to accept that what they were doing wasn't working. And so I think that's part of what I said in the beginning with the silent agreement. When you enter into a silent agreement with a supporter and receiver, you have to be willing to know that sometimes you're going to miss the mark. And what does it mean to circle back? How can you not make it a measurement of you, but a measurement of the grief and the suffering? So those kinds of responses are measurements of grief and suffering, not of the receiver or the supporter. I like this image here, kind of helping us find our place in the puzzle. The person experiencing the bad thing, they're at the center. Significant others, parents, just the closest family or friends that are intimately involved with the person who had the bad thing. Then, true friends, larger community, etc. So looking at that and saying, where do I fall on this, and how can I make sure that my inward energy is to provide comfort and my outward energy is seeking support for what I need. And one of my very best friends, she just nailed this 100% of the time as she walked alongside my grief, because I later found out that she had her own target circle around her as the person who had the very bad thing happen in her life, and had her own set of support systems in place for her grief around losing my daughter. And I never once knew it, because of where she was in my target, it was going in. And then she was in her target where it was all going out. It's a good way to sort of sift through positionality in the supporter's role. There's this new idea I'm working with to help people specifically in grief beyond suffering like job loss and life changes and whatnot, but actual grief, so that we as grievers and supporters can really develop a language to ask for what we need and to offer things we think will be most supportive. And what would happen if we were able to see the comfort of these terms through the filter of support? For example, my husband and I were sitting on the front porch right around school starts, and we live right by school. So we have to watch all the kids that would have been in kindergarten with Marley go by, and all the kids that would have been in first grade with her go by. And we were sitting there just silently together. And he said, you know, Sarah, it breaks my heart that you don't talk about more memories with Marley. And I had literally at that very moment been thinking, God, I wish he would talk about what it would be like to watch her walk to school today. And I started thinking about how these memories were so rich in comfort to him. And this imagining was so rich in comfort to me. My mom hangs her hat 100% on the fact that my dad and my daughter are in heaven together. That is her language of grief. That is where the comfort is sourced. I know people who, man, if they don't get to hit the gym or walk 10 miles a day or move their body or do yoga, the physical piece, that's the comfort in the grief. Because when you're in grief, you feel so out of control because you are. It is the most revealing experience of lack of control, I think, of the human condition. And so here are ways to let our brain kind of calm down and say, no, I have a little bit of a plan. I know that talking about memories brings me a lot of comfort. So the people who are with me can identify that and talk about memories. I know that being quiet and still and in contemplation brings me comfort. So I know the people who are coming to be with me need to participate in this contemplative, peaceful support. Supernatural, you know, when my daughter died, once my daughter died, feathers, feathers, feathers everywhere, all the time, feathers. I mean, my yard will sometimes have 40 feathers in it. And I look for a dead bird, wondering, like, is there a dead bird? No, there's not. It's just feathers. And it doesn't matter if there's a dead bird, really, because what matters is among those feathers, I spend many minutes thinking of, connecting to, cherishing, loving, being comforted by the feathers. Additionally, anybody in my life who knows me, I get pictures of feathers all the time now, which is so wonderful. What a way to tend to my grief. Because what does that tell me? So and so stopped, saw a feather, thought of sweet Marley, took a picture, sent it to me, wasn't afraid to send it to me, sent it to me because they know my language sometimes is supernatural and show me those feathers. So I'll talk, you know, like today we're talking a lot about what it means to enter into these conversations. And the next workshop I'm doing, which is the new languages of grief, it's free. It's just like this one, but we'll take more time to actually dive into assessing the languages, knowing how to communicate within each of those languages, and encouraging the receiver, the griever, to use the language, which is hard because people will say, oh, well, what do you need? I don't know what I need. Are you kidding me? Well, this is one way to equip the griever with some language to ask for what they need. I need to talk about the memories. I need to be quiet. I need to go for a walk. And then connecting that to the grief process. I'm just reading a chat from Linda Bryce that says, intriguing approach. Sarah reminds me of the 5 love languages, meaning we each resonate. And so, yes, exactly. What if we were able to see our needs through these lenses? And I think a primary difference between, say, the love languages is that that is your love language. Like, I know I'm verbal affirmation, period, end of story. However, with grief, because it's always changing, so would your language be changing, and that's okay. You know, I might start out morning memories and afternoon physical, but the bottom line is that I'm having a strategy to learning to live with the grief. So I hope that kind of answers what you put there in the chat, Linda. And as a supporter, I hear people say, oh, Sarah, I really wish we had a manual for this. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a manual for how to care for those in grief? And so I've spent a lot of time contemplating what that would look like. And I'll just share with you that this is the best that I've come up with so far. As your supporter, I will let you be yourself. I will not hurry you along through your day, your week, or your grief. I will have an abundance of compassion. I will be present to your grief by listening, validating, and honoring where you are today. I will be myself and honor my boundaries. I will follow your lead or lead in our relationship and understand that dynamics are constantly changing. I will respect contemplative silence and respect the benefit of voice. I will be patient with your process by being patient with your grief. I will honor the grief and gratitude of your spoken or unspoken experience. I will be sensitive to your triggers. I will share what I think will be helpful and remain open to feedback. And I will pay attention to what you are telling me.
So we just want to close here by saying, first and foremost, thank you for having the courage to show up to this space. It truly takes a village to support one another, and there is a realness to the ripple effect that happens when there's a tipping point, when there's enough people that really have a foundation and a confidence to really show up in these spaces. It not only impacts the person who is suffering themselves, but in that image that Shara showed earlier, this ripple effect of all those that are really impacted by a space of suffering. And as we open the space up, recognizing what recently happened in Colorado yesterday and Atlanta and the deaths around COVID, and it goes on and on and on. We know we are sitting in the midst of so much global pain right now. So thank you for being individuals and hearts that are willing to learn alongside of us in all of this. We have here in the chat box links to Clear Mourning and the Peaceful Presence Project. We love hearing from people and getting feedback. So please reach out and let us know, anything that you think would be useful for us to have as little nuggets of feedback or information about your experience. We will follow up with an email with the slideshow itself, with other links to some resources and a link for people to register to the Languages of Grief offering that Sarah just mentioned. And yeah, thank you so much. And one more thing, both organizations are definitely dependent on donations from our community to continue doing this work. So we get that people are in the midst of a lot of different challenges right now. And I shared the link for Clear Mourning. If anyone does have the space and the resource to make a donation, it would be greatly appreciated by Clear Mourning organization. So thank you all for being here, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you so much. That was fabulous.
Oh, good. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.